Today on New Craft Workshop, we're making these modular closet storage units. Let's do this. All right, so a couple months ago, we actually built a shoe rack. Need some more because we got some shoes. And my wife asked for a couple shelving units like this so that we could put some totes and her purses and stuff like that on it. So I have designed these modules to be sturdy, number one, but number two, they are stackable. We've got holes drilled in the top and bottom so we can put some dowels in there and they will self-align as we stack them. I am going to show you the process for both of these. These are basically the same exact unit. The main difference is going to be the size of our end pieces, and this is going to have 4 horizontal pieces that are going to give us our shelf, and then this is going to have some pieces running the other direction that are going to allow us to stack our shoes. So let me get this thing out of the way. And like we do everything else here on our channel, see, check that out. I'm going to start with your cut list. Now, I'm going to give you 2 cut lists. The first cut list is going to be for the shoe rack module. The second cut list, of course, will be for the shelving module. Everything we are building today is made out of 2x4s from the big box store that we are going to cut to length and rip down at the table saw. Both of these combined, I think I used 5 2x4s, so I've got both of these, maybe 6. Yeah, both of these units still, even if it was 3 2x4s a piece, I've got $10 in each one of these modules. Go to IKEA, buy you something cheap. It's not going to be as sturdy as this, and it's going to cost you a whole lot more than 10 bucks a piece. Okay, let's get after this with our cut list. So I'm going to start with the shoe rack module. We basically are going to break this down into an end component, which is going to be our square frame. We've got some horizontal runners, and then we have some flat slats that are going to go on top that our shoes are going to rest on. So here's your cut list. For each end component, we're going to need a grand total of 4 pieces at 16 inches long. Those are going to be 1.5 by 1 1/4. And then we're going to need 4 pieces at 9 inches long. Those are also 1.5 ripped down to 1 1/4. Everything else for the shoe module rack is ripped to 1 inch thick. We're going to need 4 pieces, 42 inches long, to span between the 2 end frames. And then we're going to need a grand total of 32, 16 per shelf. These are 11.5 inches long. That is 2.5 inches plus the 9 inches. Your frame is going to be 11.5. We want these pieces to be flush up against the front. That's what you're going to need for your shoe rack module. So now, cut list number 2. Things are changing a little bit as far as our dimensions. We are going to need, for the end pieces, we are going to need 6 9-inch long boards because there is a piece in the middle to support our middle shelf. And then we are going to need 4 pieces at 26 inches long. All of those are 1.5, ripped down to 1 1/4 inch. We are going to need 8 pieces at 1.5, ripped down to 1 inch thick. Those 8 pieces are 42 inches long. That's all we're going to need for our cut list. As always on my channel, here's your tool list. We're going to need it all today. We're going to need our miter saw to cut everything to length. We're going to need our table saw to cut everything to width. We are going to use the router table because we are going to run a 1/4 inch roundover bit on every single exposed surface. We don't want to reach in here to grab our shoes and have a sharp edge. We're going to need our drill with a countersink bit. We're going to need our driver with some screws. We're going to need wood glue, and I am not finishing this. Oh, and you're going to need your brad nailer as well. I know, like I tell you all the time, the cut list is always right because that goes in when I edit after I'm done filming. We're going to need a brad nailer to tack everything in place until the glue sets up on a lot of this stuff. So back to what I was saying, I'm not finishing this. I like the look of this. It's kind of natural, and that's how it's going to stay. Again, as always on my channel, use this blueprint and make it your own. Customize this thing, build it a little different, build it better than I built it. And then send me your pictures on social media, Instagram, Facebook, website. The new website is up. Check it out while you get a chance, newcraftworkshop.com right there. And down in the description, I'll put some links to all my social media as well. So let's get a little more interactive. So this build, let's get after it. Look, you can tell that this board has some warp in it. It's completely okay.
Is it though?
Because we're cutting these things in such small lengths and we're making slats out of them to set our shoes on, the only pieces that we really need to worry about being completely as straight as possible are going to be the 4 pieces that make up our edge or end components that hold our modules together. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up some stop blocks over here. We need some 9-inch pieces. We need some 11-inch pieces, or 11.5, excuse me, some 16s and some 42s. And just remember, we are using on our frames, we are using 1.25 inches, which means that we will not be able to get more than 2 pieces out of the width of a 2x4 because 3.5 inches, we're not going to be able to get 3 of those by the time we rip, and our kerf takes away some material as well. So for our end frames where we need 4 9-inch pieces, that means we're going to need to cut 2 9-inch pieces of our 2x4. Hopefully that made sense, because you're not going to be able to get everything out of one width of a 2x4. But don't throw away your scraps, because those scraps can be used on another project in your shop. So let's head over to the miter saw, set up our stop blocks, 9, 11.5, 16, 42. Let's do this. And hey, before we get started, hopefully you can hear me through this really cool mask. If you guys are in need of a really comfortable dust mask, right here, Basecamp masks, I'll pop a link down in the description. Use my promo code for 10% off everything on their website. Best mask I've ever owned, and I actually wear it because I can breathe in it. So let's get after this. All right, so at this point, this is what we've got. We've got our 2 42s, 2 16, 2 9s, and 11 pieces at 11.5. The reason we needed, hopefully it made sense when I explained it earlier, 2 pieces at 42s, because when we cut these out, we're only going to get 3 out of 1. So we're going to need 2 to get our 4th piece out of. Again, don't waste your other ones. Keep it. You're going to use it on something else down the road anyway. So now it's time to get over to the table saw and start ripping everything down to width. Whenever I'm cutting these, normally I take the curved edges of my 2x4s off, but because everything is going to get rounded over at the router table, I'm going to just simply leave the rounded over parts here, and we're going to get everything starting at 1 inch and just get everything cut down to width. So it's going to get a little repetitive, but got to do it. Let's go. All right, so I'm going to get started with these 4 pieces. These are the pieces that are going to get ripped to 1 1/4 inch. I'm going to raise my blade up slightly above my material and then set my fence to 1 1/4 inch. We're going to need 4 of each of these pieces. So we're going to, all right, so we're going to need 4 of these pieces, and if I was cutting any thinner than 1 inch, I would probably use my thin rip jig so that my cutoffs fall on this side of my blade, but 1 to 1 1/4 inch, I feel completely comfortable with those running between my blade and my fence, as long as I'm using my push block to get through here. Anything shorter, or excuse me, narrower than 1 inch, I would highly recommend not letting that cut off side be between your blade and your fence. Let it fall off on the other side. Get yourself a thin rip jig, make yourself a thin rip jig. If you want a really good one, I've shown you guys one in one of my Amazon videos before. I'll put a link down below to it. Super good unit. It's like $22. Safety first, right? So let's get this thing, also this Best thing I've bought in quite a while. Super easy adjustments. Get your featherboard up against your material. If you don't have a good quality featherboard, again, link down below. This thing is awesome. So let's get these things cut. All right, we're back from the table saw. 4 9-inch pieces, 4 16-inch pieces. Let's grab 2 each of these. And we're basically gonna lay out our frames for our end. This is the box that is going to become each of the 2 end pieces. All we're gonna do is put a little dab of glue in each quarter, and we're gonna drive some screws in here to hold this in place. I am using inch and I think they're 1.5 inch long construction screws. I'll put a link down below in the description to exactly the screws that I'm using. But first thing we want to do is we want to countersink. We're going to take our 4 16-inch pieces and we are going to use one of our pieces to put a mark, if I can find something to write with. I've never lost my pencil or pen ever on this channel.
That is not true.
Right? So we're just going to kind of put a little mark here. And then in the middle of that mark, I'm not measuring this. We know this is 1.25 inches, so half of this is going to be like 5/8, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I think it's 5/8, but whatever. Just take your thing, measure it, eyeball half of that, and then take your square and run it across. This is where our countersinks are going to go in, and on this end I'm not even going to bother measuring because I've got a pretty good idea where this thing needs to go. So I'm going to just kind of come down here and do the same thing. We're going to drill right in the center of this. That's going to be our countersink, and don't worry, when we sand and sand and sand some more, and then we sand a little bit more, these pin marks will go away. So countersink. I am using this particular unit by Amana. This thing is great because you can adjust the pilot bit as well as the countersink bit. This piece rolls. Once you get to your final depth, this thing is going to spin. It's going to keep you from going too deep, number one, and because this thing rotates, it's not going to burn up your wood. So we're just going to countersink all 4 of these on both ends. And now we can get this assembled. Our 2 end frames are together. Our frames are going to get ran over the router table just like everything else is, 1/4 inch round over bit. These components are going to get all sides rounded over, inside, outside, top, bottom, left, right, up, down. Everything on this is going to get ran over a 1/4 inch bit. All of these components, we're going to do the top 4 sides. Bottom, I'm not too worried about. We just want something that when we're reaching in for our shoes isn't sharp. So we're going to round it off all of this. Very tedious, but through the magic of editing, you won't have to watch it very long. I'll speed it up as fast as I can. So next step, router table. All right, we are back from the router table, and we have 2 quick steps before we can start this assembly. I have marked from the end a mark 3 inches in on top and bottom of both ends and centered it in the board. We're gonna drill a 3/8 inch hole here. I'm using 3/8 dowel. If you're using a different size dowel to connect these modules together, just make sure you drill a hole that matches the size of your dowel. The purpose of those holes to hold the dowel rods are so that when we stack our modules on top of each other, the dowel is going to keep them aligned on top of each other. So that's what we need these holes for. And also, if you're going more than 2 of these modules high, it is going to get a little top heavy possibly. So anything higher than 2 of these, I'm going to recommend that you find a way to attach the top module or two to your wall, even if it's just strap them in place with some strapping. You don't want anything tipping over, even if it's just a bunch of shoes. So 2 quick things: we got to drill these holes, and then we have to countersink our horizontal pieces. The bottom 2 horizontal pieces are going to get mounted to the bottom of our frame, so these are going to be easy to countersink. Our middle pieces are going to run in the middle of this board here, so we're going to have to actually countersink on the side of these pieces. So we're going to drill some 3/8 holes for our rods, countersink, and then we'll get this thing assembled. All right, all of our countersinks are in. Our holes are drilled for our dowels to connect these two. It's time to get this thing assembled. Basically, we are going to just set this out. We're going to install our 2 bottom horizontal pieces first. Little dab of glue in each one. Once these 2 are mounted, we're going to measure up from the top of this horizontal piece to the bottom of the next one is going to be 6 inches. That's going to space these 2 evenly in the dimensions I gave you. Glue, screws. Once this is assembled, I will show you how we're going to space out the other pieces, and this thing is done. So let's get after it. We are ready now to get all of our remaining slats put on here. I'm going to take a dab of glue. We're going to drop these in place. A 1-inch spacer that we're going to use in between. I've designed this to have a 1-inch gap in between each one of these. And the last time I did this, I made 2 mistakes. One, I started on the top row, couldn't get my brad nailer in to the bottom row. Learn from my mistake. Second thing, I also learned from the first time. I tried to do it in this position. It became a pain in the ass to get all of these lined up in this direction. So what we are going to do is we're going to lay this flat and use our workbench as our guide to keep all of these pieces exactly the way they need to be front to back. So we're going to start on this section because, again, I can get my brad nailer in here. We're going to put a dab of glue on the bottom of each one of these, tack them in place with an 1 1/4 brad. Once the glue dries, this is going to be nice and sturdy. So, again, repetitious. I'll speed this thing up. Let's go. Shoe rack module. This one is a little more tedious than the other one that we're going to build, the one that I'm calling the shelving module. That one, instead of having all of these particular pieces to set our shoes on, it's going to have 4 of these long 42-inch piece of verticals and only 1 piece. Basically, we got to hold those 4 together. So I'll show you how that's going to work out. I'm not going to show you the process of cutting, routing, ripping, sanding, and all of that stuff on the next one because I've already given you a cut list for that one, but I am going to show you the assembly process. So let's get after it. So on our shelving unit, I do want to show you one slight change before I actually get the assembly process started. I'm doing this prior to all of the routing over on the router table. We have that extra 9-inch piece, and basically it's going to go in here just like this. This piece is to hold all of the slats that run horizontally on this shelving unit. So I just wanted to show you guys this prior to the assembly, because once I get it assembled, I won't be able to film this. So
You don't say. You don't say.
sometimes I have to work backwards when I'm filming versus editing. So yeah, that's what that third piece is for. This is what our frame is going to look like. 26-inch pieces, 3 9-inch pieces is going to make up each one of our ends. So there you go. All right, so the biggest difference between what we did with the shoe rack and what we're doing with this one is this cross piece right here. This is what is going to hold our middle pieces in when we put our shelf together. Now the great thing about this is because we inserted this when we did, now everything can get mounted from the top, so we don't have to worry about doing anything from the side like we did on the previous. We're going to put 4 42 inches along each one. That's going to give us enough. I think that's going to give us right at 9 inches of flat space to put our totes or whatever. So same as the previous build, we are going to countersink each end of these, and then we're going to drive them in with some screws, and this one's done. Let's get after it. We've got a small opening and a large opening. This is our bottom. We need this space in between here to be the same as this, and because we are putting things on top of this, I have measured this. When we stack the next one, that's going to give us a little bit higher of an opening on this panel, this cavity, so that's why this one is smaller than this one, but the big one is your bottom. I am not going to glue these pieces in place because I am screwing all of these down. And the reason I'm screwing these down is I want this to be a little bit more rigid because I have no idea what's actually going to wind up on this. 4 pieces per cavity, screws, assembly's done, we're out. Let's wrap this up. That's it. Shoe module, shelving module. If you decide to shrink this thing down and not make it as wide, just make sure that I have made these dimensions to be perfectly spaced 1 inch apart, and make sure that they are all universal. If you shrink this down, you need to make sure you space these accordingly, unless it doesn't matter to you, and then in that case, just let it be what it is, right? But my dimensions are my dimensions because I wanted these to be spaced exactly, and this fits 4 pair of my tennis shoes exactly, or 5 pair of my wife's. So, appreciate you as always. 2 quick things before we go. Number 1, new website is up. There's some things coming, some changes for our channel as well as our social media and stuff. Merchandise and plans will be up by February 1st, so please hang in there. Everything that we do here on the channel, I'm doing my absolute best to get plans for all of those so that you guys can have access to those. Number 2, we're going to start doing some new things on our channel. We are going to start offering some memberships. They're actually available now. Actually, I have 2 people that have already signed up to be a member of New Craft Workshop, and I am so thankful for you 2 already. Memberships are going to include things like discounts to plans, merchandise on our thing. We're going to do first and third Friday of the month. We're going to do like a live chat. You're going to have special videos that are only available to members, stuff like that. So if you're interested in supporting our channel and you're able to support our channel, there's going to be some links down below talking to you about our membership and how to become involved. And then, like I said, February 1st, be ready. Got some merchandise coming. We got some cool stuff, t-shirts, water bottles, kind of like Yeti cans, coffee mugs, New Craft Workshop branded logo on there, or make it your own, your choice. You guys know what that means if you've been here before. So appreciate everything you guys have done for us. As always, thanks for spending a little bit of your time with me today. And that's all I got. Catch you on YouTube.